Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
The next presenter, probably one of the most recognizable faces over here, all the way from India, Chandeep. So have a great session, man.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Excellent. You obviously know my name. I do Power Query stuff. The one other thing that I do apart from Power Query is I make some hysterical faces. This gets me to places like this. People watch the YouTube videos that I make, and I get to be places like this. Now, I'm not going to make any faces like this today. But what I'd like to talk about today is how can you extend the capabilities of Power Query beyond the user interface? And how can you just solve practical data cleaning problems that are just a notch above from the user interface? Now, what I'm going to do is, in order to make this session a bit more entertaining, I've got 3 musketeers. Could you raise your hands at the back? The 3 supporters, okay. These 3 people, which are sitting on the corners of the room, standing actually, they have a few chocolates. Yes, and if you do answer the question that I ask you in the session, you're going to get some calories. Now, before I start, I would like to know how many of you use Power Query? Raise your hands. Fantastic. How many of you also have maybe seen the formula editor or the advanced editor, or you've seen the M language behind it? Just seen it, perhaps not used it. Okay, okay. So we'll explore all of that today. Now, that could have been like a session worth over a month's time. I don't have that time with me. So what I'm going to do is, in 40 minutes, I will try to explain you as much as I can. And I'd like to start with 2 very important concepts. The first important concept is nothing but a list in Power Query. And the second most important concept is a very important concept. Let's just start with the very important concept first, like the second point first, because it's very important. I came up with this while having breakfast in London, and I said, feed Power Query what it likes to eat. When you're writing M, and if you input in the formula something that Power Query doesn't like to eat, it's going to vomit. And you don't want Power Query to vomit. Not literal vomit, it's going to give you an error. So before I go ahead, I'd like to give you a demo of what this actually means, feed Power Query what it likes to eat. Let's jump back to Excel here. If you take a look at my screen, I've got 3 tables in front of me. Table 1, which is for 2021 data, 2022 data, and 2023 data. I just want to combine the 3 tables, append them one below the other, so I'm just going to fire up a Power Query screen and start from there. I open up the Power Query window, which is where I have already done very minimal amount of legwork. I hope you can take a look at my screen at the moment. The 3 tables have been loaded in Power Query. And if I happen to preview those tables, I can even see the preview. That's my 2021 data, 2022 data, and 2023 data. I want to append them together. There happens to be a formula in Power Query that can do that. And that formula is table.combine. Let's try to use that. So for the people who have never worked with Power Query, and you've mostly used the user interface, that happens to be the FX button that can create a new step. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I make a new step, and that step refers back to the table in the previous step. Now, like the formula that I told you was table.combine, I'm just going to write over it, so I'll say table.combine. I start the bracket. Now, since I want to combine the tables of this particular column, I will feed the name of the content column within my formula. Let's just see what happens. So I start the square bracket, I write the content column right here, and I close the bracket. It gives me an error. That is the vomit. What I was trying to say is that when you're writing Power Query functions, you need to read what the function is asking you to input inside of the function. And unless you give it the right way, like the Power Query is asking you for, it's not going to work. Let me show you once again. If I go back to the formula once again and start to read the IntelliSense, I start the bracket. Now, if you take a look at the formula says, hey, you know what? Why don't you give me a couple of tables that you want to combine, okay? But those tables should be in the form of a list. And unless you very specifically do that, the formula isn't going to work. I need to have a list, and the list should contain the tables, and that should be what should go inside of the formula. Let's try that one more time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this step that I have created. I know that I can right-click on the content column, and there is an option that is there in the right-click menu, which is nothing but drill down. Let me do that. I press enter. It drills down. At the moment, what you see on the screen is nothing but a list, and it has 3 tables. That's exactly what the table.combine function was asking me for. Let's try to write the formula once again. This formula up on the top gives you a list, and the list contains 3 tables. So I'm going to wrap this in the table.combine function, and hopefully this should work this time. Table.combine, start the bracket, close the bracket in the end, and the values do combine well. The point that I was trying to make, which was the very important point, was that if you're writing the M language, please do take a look at the IntelliSense. And the IntelliSense is going to guide you as to how do you have to put in the parameters of the function, like the specific way it needs it. And if you do not provide it the way it needs it, it is going to do the vomit. Moving on. At this point in time, you may have 2 questions. Question number 1, what the heck is a list? Question number 2, we could have also just expanded the table. Like, I am quite sure that this button would have been clicked by you a lot of times. Why didn't I just do that? Yes or no? 2 questions. Let's answer both of these questions. But before I answer those questions, let's just explore what exactly is our list, which is my first point. So let's just go back to the presentation and talk about lists. Now, list happens to be a 1-columnar value in Power Query. Anything that is 1 columnar, a table can also be 1 columnar, but that's not a list. A list is a special type of value that is 1 columnar. It has got no header. You can have as many items as you would want. It is declared in the curly brackets, and every single item is separated by a comma. You can see all of that on the screen. I've got 3 values, 1, 2, and 3, and they are separated by commas in the curly brackets. It doesn't have a header. The header is nothing but a generic list. That is nothing but a list. All right. Now that you have a very preliminary understanding of what a list is, let's just try to use that. I'm going to head back to my demo file and open up example number 2. A while ago, we were at this stage when we were working with example number 1, and we had 3 tables to combine. And the second question that we asked was that, why didn't I just expand the tables? Let's expand the tables. So I'm going to click right here on this button and try to expand the tables, uncheck the name prefix, year customer value, all good, click on OK, and that is the table expanded. All good, same result, no difference whatsoever. I also carried forward the last column, which is the name column, that tells me what table is that. Now, let's just take a look at the formula bar. So I will copy this formula, and I will open up a notepad, and I am going to make some notes. All right, I'll just quickly format this a bit. All right. That's the formula that is there up right here in the formula bar. Now, if you take a look at this particular formula, you're going to see there are lists in there. So it says, hey, I want to expand a table. Which table? I want to expand this particular table, which is filtered rows. That is right here. And if you take a look, which column did we expand on? That means if you go back to the previous step, you would see that we clicked on the content column. So the content column is hard-coded within the formula. That's the second part. And then you're going to see that the very familiar list that we just saw it a while ago. All good, no problem whatsoever, but if back in the source data, at the moment we have 3 columns, if there are 4 columns, this list would not put in a comma automatically and add the value of the 4th column automatically. That means that your table now has 4 columns, hypothetically speaking, but your list would not automatically expand to capture the 4 columns. All right, so what we need to do is, and for anybody of you who's kind of curious, you would want to maybe know that why are there 2 lists, like the first one and the second one? What's the purpose of the second one? Sorry? Exactly. So I didn't even ask the question, but hey, I'd like to give you one. Fair. Never mind. For people who don't know, that why are there 2 lists? What's the point of having 2 lists? The point is this. When you're clicking on the expand button right here, and in the next step you have these 2 lists, the first lists are the columns that you're expanding, and the second list, just in case if you would like to rename the columns. So, hey, I would like to rename the year column as, let's say, year 1, and without adding an additional step, you would be able to rename the columns in the second list automatically. So now if you take a look at my query, the year column gets expanded, but also after the expansion, it does rename to year 1. However, this particular list is not a mandatory input, and we can just discard that for now. Fair enough? All right. Now, coming back to the question, our data at the back could possibly expand. You could have the 4th column coming in. And if the 4th column does come in, this list, which is year customer and the value, will not automatically hard-code the 4th column's name when we need to do something about it. All right? So I'm going to go back to my query just a step prior. If you think about the logic is something like this. The logic is, hey, take these 3 tables, no matter what columns, and from these 3 tables, I don't want the data, I just want the column names. But because we discussed point number 1, feed Power Query what it likes to eat, those column names need to be in the form of a list. If they are not, then it's not going to work. So let's just start doing some work. So I'm going to add a new step between the 2 steps that I already have. Click on Insert. And I'm going to write a function, table.combine. What is the input of table.combine? No? Speak louder. No? A list that contains the tables. Who said that? Could you please give that gentleman a few calories? A list with tables, not list. If you have a list that doesn't contain tables, it's not going to work again. Anyways, so table.combine, here is my table, here is the content column. And I close the bracket, I press enter, and that's my combined table. I don't want the data. I don't want to combine the table. I just want what? The tables that have been combined, I just want the headers of those tables. So that means I'm looking at year, customer, and the value, which was technically hard-coded earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap this particular function in another function called table.columnNames. And I don't mind hammering the concept once again, which is feed Power Query what it likes to eat. If you take a look at the formula right now, the formula is asking you, give me a table. The input is nothing but a table. And this is nothing but a table, and if I feed that in the formula, it is going to yield me a list. The input was a table, but the output is nothing but a list. Now compare this list that we have received to this particular list, which was hard-coded. This was hard-coded. This list, on the contrary, is driven through a formula. So what I can do is now, I can rename this particular step as my columns. I can go back to the expanded step, which must have broken by now. The first part of expand columns is the table that you're trying to work with. So the table that I was trying to work with was this particular table, filtered rows, and I'll correct that. So I'll say filtered rows. The second part is the column that you're expanding. Sure enough, I'm expanding the content column. And then I don't want anything to be hard-coded. I want my list to come and play this. Do that, click on OK, and that's my combined table. Save the claps. At the moment, you haven't seen what happens to the data in case there is a column added back in the data set. So I'm just going to click on Close and Load. So I'll come out of Power Query, click on Close and Load. And for the third table, I might want to add one more column. So I'll just say a random column, and just write the value 1 in every single row. Now, if I go back to Power Query, the random column should be appended to the entire table that was combined. It should only appear the values in the third table, but the column should be added. Let's just go take a look. So if I go back to Power Query and take a look to my example number 2, you're going to see that we do have that random column added. I was expecting that now is the time that you would clap, but that's all right. All right. Now, the lists can go further, and you can have slightly more complicated type of lists. Like you can have a nested list, like a list inside of a list. Let's just take a look at the concept first. So if you take a look at the screen, it's still a very list that we spoke about a while ago. It still has one column. But now you will have nesting. Like you would have 2 curly brackets to nest another list in a list already. That's a nested list, a list inside of a list. I mean, if you've understood nested list is just another list inside of a list. Every single item is still separated by a comma. You still have the curly brackets. You still have the header that says list. Cool, that's the concept. But where do we use it? Let's take a look. So if I just go back to sheet 2, I have a very simple table right here, which has 3 columns. Name, units, and the sales. 2 columns have been purposefully marked as an error. And let's just load this table into Power Query. So if I just go to Power Query and take a look at the query that I have made, you're going to see that on this particular table, like you would expect, those 2 rows are going to show up as error rows. Fair enough? What's the most likely thing that you're supposed to do now for the UI people? Remove errors, but that you would lose the data, or replace errors with a null value, or something or the other, right? Let's just do one of those things. I'm going to head over to units and the sales, 2 columns selected in one go. And I will go to the transform tab, and that's where I have replace values. Underneath, there's a replace errors dropdown. And I'll say that, hey, why don't you just call the errors out as a null? Say OK. The formula is right there, and the errors are gone. Let's just copy the formula once again and start to work with that. So I'll just maybe take a second to format that. All right. If you take a look at the formula on the screen, like we just saw, it's a nested list, a list inside of a list. So you're going to see that, hey, there is an outside list. There is an outside list, which is right here. And the inner list, which is this list, the first list, and the second list, it's a nested list. And if you take a look at the list contains 2 things. The first one is the name of the column, which is right here. And the second value is what would you like to replace it by, which is nothing but a null. Now, Again, you're going to see that the column names are hard-coded, which means that tomorrow, if in the data you have a cost column or any other column being added, and that column also has an error value, the error will pertain in the other columns. So the query is not really dynamic. So you would want to build a query that survives in case you have an error. The problem, however, is that the names of the columns are hard-coded. So if a new column kicks in, Power Query will not automatically write the new column name unless you do something about it. We'll start from the top. Feed Power Query what it eats. So this part of the formula, this particular part of the formula, is eating not a list, but a nested list. Every single nest of the list or every single sub-list is going to have two parts to it. Part number one, name of the column. Part number two, the null value. And unless we are able to create that dynamic structure, a list with two values, with two sublists, and each sublist is going to have two values, name and the column and the null value, we will not be able to solve the problem. Let's start. So I am going to retain this particular step for now, and between the source and replace errors, I'll make more stuff. So I'll make a new column, a new step right here, fx, and then I just want the names of the columns. And the formula that I used to get the names of the columns was? Sorry, say that again. Louder. Table dot column names, okay? So if I happen to write table dot column names, it asks for a table. Source, this particular step, is nothing but a table. It's going to work, and it is going to give me the names of the columns. What is the problem at the moment? Say that again. Yeah, it's a list, not a nested list. I'll ask another question to give you a chocolate. It's a list, not a nested list. So I need to do something with the list that converts it into a nested list. And every single item of the list needs to have two further values, the name of the column, which we already have, and the second value is going to be null. So let's just do work with that list. So now I'm going to go ahead and start to write my formula something like this. And I'll say that, hey, I'm trying to work with a formula, which is list.transform. I want to transform this list. This gives me a list. I want to transform this list. And my transformation is such that every value should not be a value, it should be a nested list. So I'll say something like, put in a comma, and I'll say, pick up every single value, which is each underscore, and I'll just close the bracket for now. So there is no transformation done. You just get the same value. I'm saying that, hey, go to this list, pick up every single value, and just give me the value as the way it is. That's it. Well, it's still not a list of a list. What happens if I happen to add a curly brackets right here? Let's say the underscore represents the value. If I put the underscore within the curly brackets, that every single value is going to transform itself into a nested list. Press enter. Wait. At the moment, our list still contains one value. How many values do we want? Two values. Can somebody tell me, how do I feed the second value in this list? Sorry? Common null. Can you please give her some calories? Every single list item, we saw that. Every single list item is separated by a comma. That's right. So that's my first item of the list, which is the underscore. And the second item that I would want is nothing but the null. Now if I take a look at my list, it does have that structure that I was trying to vie for. If you take a look at my formula, the formula is asking you for a list. That is my outside list. And within which I have an inside list, which is this particular list, which contains two values that I'm looking for. That's exactly what I wanted. All right? Because we have been feeding Power Query what it likes to eat, I will go back to the table.replace error values function, and I'll say, hey, the first part is nothing but the table that you're trying to work with. That is going to be my source table. Then all of this is hard-coded, and I can replace that with custom1, which is nothing but a list of a list. So custom1, close the bracket, press enter, errors are gone. Wait. We need to test this out. So I am going to come out of Power Query, and I'll create a cost column, and I'll just maybe write an NA error right here, and the rest of the cells can be 0. That's fine. Oops. All right. And then I'm going to go back to my Power Query and take a look at the result. That should have replaced with a null value. Thank you. All right. Now, how many people did not understand shit? That's fine. That's fine. Because if you didn't understand shit, then I'm a salesy speaker who's come here to just sell his M course on Power Query. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code and get my M course on Power Query. And as a gratitude, I'm offering a 25% discount on the course. That QR code leads you to that sales page. On that sales page, you're going to find that box, whatever. Use the code BED25, Bulgaria Excel Days 25, to get a 25% discount on the course. If you've clicked the pictures, I'd like to make the last hysterical face to end the presentation. Thank you. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Chandeep. Any questions? Does that one work? The microphone?
Let me check. So, Chandeep, we can replace error values with nested list, but can we replace multiple values of different columns instead of errors? Instead of errors,
you'd like to have the choice of the column, that what column gets what value.
Yeah, for example, we have sales revenue, and we have some extremely high values that we should exclude and replace with nulls. Can we do it that?
Yes, but I will not demo that right now, but I'll give you a hint. So, if you take a look at this formula right here, this is your key point. This formula needs a list of a list. That's your starting point. And you need to make your formula, whatever that formula is, dynamic in such a way that you have the choice of the columns and you have the choice of the replacement value. If you can make that in the form of a list and then feed that in the formula, it's going to work. Okay.
Okay, next question.
In this case, the values, the units and the sales are like a text, right? Can you replace them with a condition?
What's your question again?
Like following up on his example, like if the sales are too high, let's say the condition that we want is more than 1,000 or more than 10,000, and then to put the nulls.
Yeah, sure. So what I would do is I would use the table.transform columns. So I would like to transform one column, which is the sales column, and keep checking every single value. And if it is more than 1,000, whatever that is, like the benchmark, then I want to replace it with something else. So yeah, possible, but then just buy the M course.
Okay, any more questions? No? Then the next time slot is the easiest to announce because you all know what it is. It's a break, and it seems like you get extra 15 minutes. So we carry on 5 minutes past. Thank you, Chandeep.